You cannot win people with logic alone. Facts don't change hearts, feelings do. If you want to master persuasion, stop trying to be right and start trying to be relatable. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Influence begins with empathy, not arguments. In this guide, I'll show you how to move people, not just with your words, but with your presence. Because true persuasion is invisible. It happens in silence, in sincerity, in understanding. Subscribe to our channel if you're ready to master your mind and tell us, where are you watching from? Listen closely, because what I'm about to share with you isn't taught in business schools or leadership seminars. The real secret of persuasion, the kind that moves mountains and changes lives, isn't about clever words or polished presentations. It's about something far more fundamental, something that lives in the heart of every human interaction. I've spent decades studying what makes people tick, what drives them to act, what makes them truly listen. And I can tell you this with absolute certainty. You will never, ever persuade anyone until you first touch their heart. Think about the last time someone truly influenced you, not manipulated, not pressured, but genuinely moved you to change your mind or take action. What was different about that person? I'll tell you what it was. They made you feel seen. They made you feel heard. Most importantly, they made you feel valued. This isn't just nice theory. This is the foundation of all human influence. I've watched thousands of people try to persuade others through pure logic, through overwhelming evidence, through brilliant arguments. And time after time, I've watched them fail. Why? Because they forgot one essential truth. People are not logical creatures who sometimes feel. They are emotional creatures who sometimes think. Let me share a story that illustrates this perfectly. Years ago, I was working with a brilliant executive. Let's call him James. He was frustrated because his team wasn't embracing his new initiative, despite its clear benefits. I've shown them the data, he told me. I've explained it a dozen different ways. They just don't get it. But here was the real problem. James didn't get it. He was so focused on being right that he forgot to be relatable. He was so intent on sharing his knowledge that he forgot to share his humanity. I asked him to try something different. Before your next presentation, I said, spend time with each team member. Ask about their challenges. Listen to their concerns. Show them you understand their world. He was skeptical, but he did it. The result? Within weeks, the same team that had resisted his ideas was now championing them. What changed? Not the facts, not the logic. What changed was the connection. This is what I mean when I say persuasion starts in the heart. When you genuinely care about people, their hopes, their fears, their dreams, something magical happens. They begin to trust you, and trust, my friends, is the currency of influence. But here's the catch, and this is crucial. You cannot fake this. People have an incredible radar for insincerity. They can smell manipulation from a mile away. The care, the interest, the empathy must be genuine. You must truly want to understand their perspective, truly want to help them succeed. Think about this. Every person you meet, every single one, is fighting a battle you know nothing about. They carry hopes you haven't heard, fears you don't understand, and dreams you can't see. When you approach them with this awareness, with genuine curiosity and compassion, you've already begun to persuade them, even before you've spoken a word about your idea or proposal. This is why I say true persuasion is invisible. It happens in the silent moments of genuine connection. It happens in the space between words where understanding grows. It happens in the nod that says, I hear you, in the question that shows, you care, in the pause that gives space for truth to emerge. As we continue this journey together, I'll show you specific techniques, proven strategies, and powerful tools for influence. But remember this, they will only work if they grow from this foundation of genuine care and connection. Without it, you're just making noise. With it, you can move mountains. So before you think about how to phrase your next pitch, before you craft your next presentation, before you try to change anyone's mind about anything, ask yourself this: Have I taken the time to understand their heart? Because that's where persuasion begins. That's where influence takes root. That's where transformation becomes possible. The techniques I'll share with you in the coming chapters are powerful, but they're only as powerful as the sincerity behind them. Remember, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that's not just a clever saying, it's the heart of persuasion. There's a hunger in the human heart that's deeper than any physical appetite. It's more persistent than the drive for wealth, more fundamental than the desire for pleasure. What is this profound hunger? It's the desire to feel important. William James, the great psychologist, said it best. The deepest principle in human nature is the craving to be appreciated. Think about that for a moment. Not the craving for success, not the craving for money, not even the craving for love, but the craving to be appreciated. I've seen this truth play out thousands of times across every level of society, from CEOs to janitors, from world leaders to young children. Everyone hungers to feel significant. And here's what's fascinating. When you understand this principle, when you learn to make others feel genuinely important, you hold the key to profound influence. But let me be crystal clear about something. I'm not talking about flattery. Flattery is counterfeit appreciation, and like any counterfeit, it's worse than worthless. It's dangerous. People can sense when you're insincere, and nothing will destroy your influence faster than fake praise. Let me share a powerful example. I once knew a manager, we'll call her Sarah, who transformed her struggling team into one of the highest performing units in her company. Her secret? She became an expert at spotting what made each team member uniquely valuable. For the quiet analyst who caught small but crucial errors, she would say, "Jim, your attention to detail has saved us from major mistakes. That's a rare and valuable gift." For the creative problem solver who always had unusual ideas, she would note, "Maria, your ability to think differently helps us see possibilities we'd miss otherwise." Notice what Sarah did. She didn't just throw around generic compliments. She recognized specific contributions. She made each person feel important for who they truly were, not who she wanted them to be. This is the art of making people feel important. It's about seeing their true value and reflecting it back to them. It's about noticing what others miss. It's about celebrating what makes each person unique. But here's where most people go wrong. They think making others feel important diminishes their own importance. Nothing could be further from the truth. When you lift others up, you rise with them. When you make others feel significant, your own influence grows. Consider this. Every person you meet today has something they're proud of, something they're good at, something they know that you don't. Your job is to discover what that is. When you do, when you show genuine interest and appreciation for that unique quality, you create a connection that can move mountains. I remember working with a young executive who was struggling to get buy-in for his ideas. He was brilliant, but he kept running into walls. When I observed him in meetings, I noticed something. He was so focused on proving his own importance that he made everyone else feel unimportant. I gave him a challenge. In his next meeting, focus entirely on making others feel significant. Ask questions that showcase their expertise. Acknowledge their insights before sharing his own. Credit their past successes. The transformation was remarkable. The same people who had resisted his ideas now leaned in when he spoke. The same colleagues who had been skeptical now sought his opinion. Why? Because he had satisfied their deepest hunger, the need to feel important. This principle works everywhere, in business, in family life, in any human interaction. When you make your children feel important by truly listening to their stories, they become more open to your guidance. When you make your customers feel important by understanding their unique challenges, they become more loyal to your business. When you make your colleagues feel important by recognizing their distinct contributions, they become more supportive of your initiatives. But remember, and this is crucial, this must come from a place of truth. Don't tell someone they're important at something unless they truly are. Don't praise what isn't praiseworthy. Instead, develop the skill of seeing what's genuinely valuable in others, because believe me, it's there, in everyone. Here's a practical challenge for you. In your next 3 conversations, make it your mission to discover what makes that person uniquely important. What do they know that others don't? What can they do that others can't? What have they experienced that gives them special insight? Then, once you've discovered it, acknowledge it. Not with empty flattery, but with genuine appreciation. Watch what happens. Watch how they open up. Watch how their resistance melts away. Watch how their desire to help you grows. Because when you satisfy this deepest hunger, the hunger to feel important, you create a connection that goes beyond logic, beyond argument, beyond persuasion. You create a bond of mutual appreciation that makes influence natural and effortless. Remember, everyone you meet today wants to feel important. When you become the person who genuinely makes them feel that way, you become the person they want to listen to, want to help, want to follow. That's not manipulation. That's human nature. That's not technique. That's truth. You know what's fascinating about dogs? They've mastered something that most humans struggle with their entire lives. When you come home, your dog is genuinely, absolutely, unreservedly interested in you. Not in what you can provide, not in what you've accomplished, just in you. And that's why dogs have influenced human behavior more successfully than any other animal on Earth. They've mastered the art of genuine interest. Now, I'm not suggesting you greet people with quite that much enthusiasm, but there's a profound lesson here about the power of authentic curiosity about others. Let me tell you something that might surprise you. You can make more friends in 2 months by becoming genuinely interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you. I've seen this principle transform lives, careers, and entire organizations. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. You cannot fake interest. I repeat, you cannot fake interest. People have an almost supernatural ability to detect insincerity. They can feel it in your questions, see it in your eyes, hear it in your voice. When you're just going through the motions, they know. And when they know, any chance of real influence vanishes. So how do you develop genuine interest in others? It starts with a fundamental shift in perspective. Instead of seeing people as means to an end, potential clients, useful connections, stepping stones to your goals, see them as books. Living, breathing books, each filled with unique stories, insights, and experiences that you couldn't find anywhere else. I once worked with a sales professional who was struggling to meet his targets. His pitch was perfect, his product knowledge was encyclopedic, but something was missing. When I observed him with customers, I noticed he was so focused on getting to his pitch that he missed countless opportunities to learn about them. I challenged him to spend his next 10 sales meetings asking questions instead of selling. Real questions, curious questions, questions that showed he genuinely wanted to understand their world. The kind of questions that make people think, wow, no one's ever asked me that before. The results were extraordinary. Not only did his sales numbers improve dramatically, but he discovered something unexpected. He actually enjoyed his work more. Why? Because he had transformed his sales calls from presentations into discoveries. Each conversation became an opportunity to learn something new, to understand a different perspective, to expand his own world. This is the paradox of influence. The less you try to influence, and the more you try to understand, the more influential you become. When you're genuinely interested in others, they become genuinely interested in you. It's almost magical how it works. But let me be clear about something. This isn't about asking a bunch of random questions. It's not about following some predetermined script. It's about developing real curiosity about the human being in front of you. What drives them? What challenges them? What excites them? What keeps them up at night? Here's a powerful technique. I've taught to countless executives and leaders before any important meeting or conversation. Ask yourself, what can I learn from this person that I couldn't learn from anyone else? Because here's the truth. Everyone you meet knows something you don't. Everyone has experienced something you haven't. Everyone sees the world in a way you can't. I remember a CEO who was frustrated with his board meetings. They were contentious, unproductive, and often ended in stalemate. I suggested he spend time with each board member individually, not to discuss business, but to understand their perspective. Become genuinely interested in their view of the world, I told him. Learn their story. He discovered that one board member had survived a corporate bankruptcy early in his career, which explained his conservative approach to risk. Another had built her company during a recession, which influenced her views on cash reserves. A third had lost market share to a disruptive startup, which shaped his perspective on innovation. Armed with this understanding, he didn't just become more persuasive in board meetings, he became a better leader. He could address concerns before they became objections. He could frame proposals in ways that resonated with each member's experience, all because he took the time to become genuinely interested in their stories. This principle works in every arena of life. Want to be a better parent? Become genuinely interested in your child's world. Want to be a better spouse? Become genuinely interested in your partner's thoughts and feelings. Want to be a better leader? Become genuinely interested in your team's challenges and aspirations. Here's a challenge for you. In your next conversation, make it your goal to learn 3 things about the other person that surprise you. Not surface things, but real insights. What experiences shaped them? What lessons have they learned? What wisdom have they gained? And here's the key. Listen not to respond, but to understand. Listen not to confirm what you already know, but to discover what you don't know. Listen not to judge, but to learn. Because when you become genuinely interested in others, something remarkable happens. They don't just open up, they open doors. They don't just share information, they share opportunities. They don't just answer your questions, they become invested in your success. Remember, everyone you meet has something to teach you. When you approach each interaction with this mindset, with genuine curiosity and authentic interest, you don't have to worry about being influential. Influence becomes the natural byproduct of understanding. Let me share a truth that took me years to understand. The most persuasive person in any conversation isn't the one with the best arguments. It's the one who best understands the other person's world. When you learn to speak someone else's language, you unlock a level of influence that logic alone could never achieve. I'm not talking about foreign languages here, though the principle is similar. I'm talking about something more fundamental, the unique way each person sees and experiences the world. Every single person you meet has their own internal language, their own values, priorities, and ways of understanding reality. Think about it this way. If you went to France, would you insist on speaking English and expect everyone to understand you? Of course not. You'd learn some French, or at least try to. Yet, how often do we do exactly that in our attempts to persuade others? We speak our language and expect them to translate. Let me tell you about a brilliant engineer I once worked with. We'll call him David. He was frustrated because his team wasn't implementing his suggestions for improving their processes. I've shown them the data, he told me. I've explained the efficiency gains. I've demonstrated the cost savings, but they just resist every change. When I observed David's interactions, I noticed something crucial. He was speaking his language, the language of data, efficiency, and systems, to people who spoke the language of relationships, stability, and practical daily concerns. He was speaking French to people who understood only Spanish. I helped David learn to translate his ideas into his team's language. Instead of talking about efficiency metrics, he talked about making your day easier. Instead of process optimization, he discussed reducing frustration. Instead of cost savings, he focused on having more resources for the things that matter to you. The same ideas, but different language. The result? His team not only embraced his changes, they began coming to him with their own suggestions for improvements. Why? Because he learned to speak their language. This principle is universal. Whether you're trying to influence your children, your colleagues, your customers, or your community, the key is to translate your message into their language. But here's the crucial part. You have to understand their language first. I remember working with a sales team that was struggling to connect with medical professionals. They had an excellent product, a new piece of medical equipment that was objectively superior to what was currently being used, but they couldn't get traction. Why? Because they were speaking the language of features and specifications to people who spoke the language of patient care and clinical outcomes. Once they learned to translate, to speak about their product in terms of improved patient experiences and better clinical results, their sales skyrocketed. Same product, different language. Here's a powerful technique I've developed over the years. Before any important conversation, ask yourself these 3 questions. What does success look like in their world? Not your world, theirs. What matters to them? What keeps them up at night? What makes them feel accomplished? What are their fears and frustrations? What problems are they trying to solve? What obstacles stand in their way? What risks are they trying to avoid? What words do they use to describe their goals and challenges? Pay attention to their exact phrases. Those are the words that carry meaning and emotion in their world. I worked with a CEO who was trying to get his board to approve a major investment in new technology. His first presentation was filled with terms like digital transformation, market disruption, and innovation ecosystem. The board was skeptical. When we analyzed the board members' language from previous meetings, we noticed they consistently used phrases like sustainable growth, proven return, and risk management. The CEO rewrote his presentation, translating his vision into these terms. The same investment, but described in the board's language. The proposal was approved. Here's another crucial aspect of speaking someone's language: timing and context. The best message delivered at the wrong time or in the wrong context will fail. You need to understand not just their language, but when and where they're most receptive to hearing it. I once coached a parent who was frustrated that her teenage son wouldn't listen to her advice about his future. She was trying to have these conversations at dinner, presenting well-reasoned arguments about college choices and career paths. But dinner was when he wanted to decompress and talk about his day. We shifted these conversations to their weekend drives together, when he was naturally more reflective and open to such discussions. Same message, different context, better results. Here's a challenge for you. In your next 3 important conversations, commit to spending the first few minutes just listening for language. What words do they use repeatedly? What phrases seem to carry special meaning for them? What metaphors do they naturally gravitate toward? Then, practice translating your ideas into their language. If they're analytical, use data. If they're emotional, tell stories. If they're practical, focus on concrete steps. If they're visual, use images and metaphors. Remember, the goal isn't to manipulate or deceive. It's to communicate in a way that resonates with their worldview. Because when you speak someone's language, you're not just transferring information, you're building understanding. You're not just making a point, you're making a connection. And that connection is where real influence begins. In all my years of studying human behavior, I've discovered something remarkable. The most influential people I've ever met spent far more time listening than talking. But here's what's fascinating. They didn't just hear words, they listened with their entire being. They listened with such intensity, such focus, that the person speaking felt like they were the only person in the world. This is what I call active listening, and it's perhaps the most powerful tool of persuasion ever discovered. Yet it's also the most underused. Why? Because true listening is hard. It requires something that's increasingly rare in our world: complete attention. Let me tell you about an experience that changed my understanding of listening forever. Years ago, I was fortunate enough to spend an evening with one of the most successful negotiators in the diplomatic corps. I expected to learn about persuasive speaking techniques. Instead, I witnessed a master class in listening. During our dinner, he gave me his complete, undivided attention. No glancing at phones, no scanning the room, no preparing his next response. While I was speaking, just pure, focused listening. By the end of the evening, I felt deeply understood and I had shared things I hadn't planned to share. That's when I realized listening isn't passive. It's one of the most active things you can do. But here's what most people don't understand about active listening. It's not just about staying quiet while the other person talks. It's about creating a space where truth can emerge. It's about making it safe for people to share what they really think, what they really feel, what they really want. I once worked with a manager who was frustrated with her team's lack of innovation. I keep telling them to think outside the box, she said, but they just keep doing things the same old way. When I observed her team meetings, I noticed something crucial. Whenever someone shared a new idea, she would immediately point out potential problems or suggest improvements. She thought she was being helpful. In reality, she was shutting down the very innovation she wanted to encourage. We worked on her listening skills. Instead of immediately responding to ideas, she learned to ask questions. Instead of pointing out problems, she learned to say, "Tell me more about that." Instead of suggesting improvements, she learned to ask, "What made you think of that approach?" The transformation was remarkable. Within weeks, her team was generating more ideas than ever before. Why? Because they felt heard. They felt safe to share half-formed thoughts, to explore possibilities, to think out loud without fear of immediate judgment. This is the power of active listening. It creates an environment where people feel safe to think, to explore, to be themselves. And when people feel that safety, they share things they wouldn't share otherwise. They consider ideas they wouldn't. Consider otherwise, they become open to influence in ways they wouldn't be otherwise. Here's a crucial technique I've taught to thousands of leaders: the art of the focused follow-up. When someone shares something, don't just move on to the next topic. Instead, dig deeper with questions like, what led you to that conclusion? How did that experience affect you? What else do you think about that? These questions show that you're not just hearing words, you're seeking understanding. They demonstrate that you value the other person's thoughts and experiences. Most importantly, they often lead to the real issue, the real concern, the real opportunity that lies beneath the surface. I remember working with a CEO who was trying to understand why his company's newest product wasn't selling well. The initial feedback from customers was positive. The features were competitive. The price was right. But something wasn't clicking. Instead of jumping to solutions, he decided to really listen to his sales team. Not just in formal meetings, but in casual conversations. Not just to their reports, but to their stories. Not just to their conclusions, but to their observations. Through this deep listening, he discovered something surprising. While customers liked the product, they were worried about how it would integrate with their existing systems. This wasn't showing up in surveys or formal feedback because it was more of a feeling than a specific complaint. But by truly listening, by creating space for people to share their gut feelings and half-formed concerns, he uncovered the real barrier to sales. This is why I say that listening is not passive, it's an active search for understanding. It's like being a detective, but instead of looking for clues about a crime, you're looking for clues about what really matters to people, what really drives them, what really concerns them. Here's a powerful exercise I want you to try. In your next important conversation, make it your goal to learn something surprising, not something you set out to learn, but something that emerges naturally when you create space for the unexpected. Listen not just to the words, but to the tone. Not just to what's said, but to what's left unsaid. Not just to the content, but to the context. And here's something crucial. Learn to be comfortable with silence. Most people rush to fill any pause in conversation, but often it's in those moments of silence that people gather their thoughts. find their courage, and share their deepest truths. Remember, every person you meet knows something you don't. Every person you meet has experienced something you haven't. Every person you meet sees the world in ways you can't. When you truly listen, actively, fully, without judgment, you gain access to all of that knowledge, all of that experience, all of that perspective. That's why I say that active listening is the foundation of all genuine influence, because when people feel truly heard, they become open to being moved. When people feel deeply understood, they become willing to understand. When people feel safely held in your attention, they become ready to change. So before you worry about what to say, learn to listen. Before you think about how to influence, learn to understand. Before you try to persuade, learn to pay attention. Because in the end, the most persuasive thing you can do is to make someone feel truly, deeply, completely heard. Let me share a secret that most people never discover. True influence has nothing to do with position or title. Some of the most influential people I've ever met never held formal authority, yet they moved mountains, they changed minds, they inspired action. How? By understanding that real power comes from presence, not position. Think about the most influential person in your life. Chances are, it wasn't someone who had authority over you. More likely, it was someone who connected with you, someone who understood you, someone who inspired you to be better than you thought you could be. I remember working with a junior analyst at a major consulting firm. Let's call her Rachel. She had no formal authority, no impressive title, no corner office. But she had something far more valuable. She had presence. When Rachel spoke in meetings, people listened, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. What made Rachel different? 3 things. First, she did her homework. She never spoke without understanding the full context of a situation. Second, she focused on solving problems, not placing blame. And third, this is crucial, she made others feel valued and capable. But here's what's fascinating about Rachel's approach. She never tried to prove she was the smartest person in the room. Instead, she focused on bringing out the best in others. When someone made a good point, she built on it. When someone had a concern, she addressed it thoughtfully. When someone needed support, she provided it without keeping score. This is the essence of influence without authority. It's not about commanding attention, it's about earning it. It's not about asserting power, it's about empowering others. It's not about being in charge, it's about taking charge of how you show up. I once worked with a team leader who was frustrated because his suggestions weren't being implemented. "I'm their supervisor," he told me. "Why won't they just do what I say?" But that was precisely his problem. He was relying on his title rather than building real influence. We worked on transforming his approach. Instead of telling people what to do, he started asking what they thought should be done. Instead of giving orders, he started giving context. Instead of demanding compliance, he started inspiring commitment. The results were remarkable. Within months, his team wasn't just implementing his suggestions. They were coming to him with their own ideas. They weren't just following his lead, they were extending his vision. Why? Because he had shifted from exercising authority to building influence. Here's a powerful truth. People may comply with authority, but they commit to influence. Compliance is temporary and requires constant oversight. Commitment is lasting and becomes self-sustaining. This is why influence is always more powerful than authority. Let me share a technique I've taught to countless professionals who needed to influence without authority. I call it the 3 C's of influence. Competence. Be excellent at what you do, not to prove your worth, but to be genuinely helpful to others. When you're truly competent, people seek your opinion naturally. Connection. Build authentic relationships based on genuine interest and mutual respect. Remember names. Remember details. Remember what matters to people. Character. Be someone whose word means something. Be consistent. Be reliable. Be the person others know they can count on. I worked with a project manager who was struggling to get cooperation from departments outside her authority. Her initial response was to escalate issues to higher management, using borrowed authority to force compliance. But this only created resentment and resistance. We shifted her approach. Instead of escalating issues, she started investing in relationships. She learned about each department's challenges and priorities. She found ways to make their jobs easier. She became a resource rather than a requirement. Within weeks, our same departments that had resisted her were now calling her for advice. The same people who had delayed her projects were now expediting them. Why? Because she had replaced authority with influence. Here's something crucial to understand: influence. Without authority isn't about manipulation or politics. It's about becoming the kind of person others want to help, want to work with, want to support. It's about creating value for others before asking for value in return. I remember a young executive who was frustrated because she couldn't get senior management to consider her ideas. "They never take me seriously," she said, but when we analyzed her approach, we discovered she was trying to influence up in the organization the same way she influenced her own team, through detailed presentations and logical arguments. We worked on adapting her approach. For senior executives, she learned to lead with impact and implications, saving details for follow-up questions. She learned to frame her ideas in terms of their priorities and concerns. Most importantly, she learned to build relationships before she needed them. The transformation was remarkable. Within months, the same executives who had seemed dismissive were now seeking her input. Why? Because she had learned to influence through alignment rather than argument. Here's a challenge for you. In your next 3 interactions where you need to influence without authority, focus on what you can give rather than what you need to get. How can you make others' jobs easier? How can you help them succeed? How can you add value to their world? Remember, true influence isn't about having power over others. It's about empowering others. It's not about making people do what you want. It's about inspiring them to want what you want. It's not about position or title. It's about presence and trust. When you understand this, when you truly embrace it, you'll never need to rely on authority again, because you'll have something far more powerful. You'll have influence that people choose to accept, rather than power you have to enforce. Let me share something profound I've learned after decades of studying human behavior. Logic makes people think, but emotion makes them act. If you want to move people, truly move them, you must first touch their hearts before engaging their minds. This isn't just philosophy, it's how the human brain actually works. Neuroscience has shown that our emotional brain processes information far faster than our logical brain. When we encounter any new idea, our feelings about it form before our thoughts do. I remember working with a brilliant executive who couldn't understand why his perfectly logical proposals kept getting rejected. His presentations were masterpieces of rational argument. His data was impeccable. His logic was flawless. But he was missing something crucial. He was trying to convince minds before winning hearts. We transformed his approach with a simple change. Before presenting any data, he would share a story. Not just any story, but one that made the problem real, human, and emotionally resonant. Instead of starting with statistics about customer churn, he would share the story of a specific customer who left feeling undervalued. Instead of leading with efficiency metrics, he would describe how frustrating the current process was for his team. The same proposals that had been rejected now found enthusiastic support. The same data that had been dismissed was now eagerly embraced. Why? Because he learned to win hearts before engaging minds. Here's what most people don't understand about the emotional engagement. It's not about manipulation. It's not about dramatic displays or overwrought appeals. It's about making the abstract concrete, the theoretical personal, the logical emotional. I once worked with a nonprofit that was struggling to raise funds for their environmental work. Their presentations were filled with facts about carbon emissions, statistical projections, and technical solutions. All important information, but it wasn't moving people to act. We shifted their approach. Instead of starting with global statistics, they began with the story of a single family whose farm was affected by changing weather patterns. Instead of talking about ecosystems in abstract terms, they showed how local wildlife was disappearing from people's backyards. Instead of focusing on technical solutions, they painted a picture of the world they were trying to create. Their donations doubled. Why? Because they learned to connect with hearts before appealing to minds. Here's a powerful technique I've developed for emotional engagement. I call it the 3 bridges of connection. Personal bridge. Share your own emotional journey with the issue, not to make it about you, but to make it real and relatable. Situational bridge. Help people see themselves in the situation. Make it immediate and relevant to their world. Aspirational bridge. Connect the immediate situation to larger hopes and values that people already hold dear. I remember a change management consultant who was trying to implement a major systems upgrade in a resistant organization. Her initial presentations focused on efficiency gains and cost savings. The response was skeptical at best, hostile at worst. We rebuilt her approach using the 3 bridges. She started by sharing her own frustration with outdated systems, her previous role, personal bridge. She then invited people to share their daily struggles with the current system, situational bridge. Finally, she connected the change to their shared aspiration for excellence and innovation, aspirational bridge. The same change that had met with resistance was now embraced with enthusiasm. Why? Because she learned to engage emotions before presenting solutions. Here's something crucial to understand. Emotions aren't the opposite of logic. They're the gateway to it. When people are emotionally engaged, they become more open to logical arguments. When they feel understood, they become more willing to understand. When their hearts are won, their minds become ready to be convinced. I worked with a sales team that was struggling to sell a premium product in a price-sensitive market. Their presentations were focused entirely on features and specifications. They were trying to win on logic alone, and they were losing. We transformed their approach. Before discussing any features, they learned to explore what success looked like in their customer's world. What were their hopes? What were their fears? What did they lie awake worrying about at night? Only after establishing this emotional connection did they present their solution. And here's what's fascinating. The same features that customers had dismissed as too expensive were now seen as essential investments. Why? Because they had won hearts before engaging minds. Here's a challenge for you. In your next presentation or important conversation, spend the first few minutes focusing solely on emotional connection. Don't try to convince. Don't try to persuade. Just connect. Share a story. Ask about their experiences. Show that you understand what matters to them. Remember, people make decisions with their hearts and justify them with their heads. If you want to influence decisions, start with the heart. If you want to inspire action, begin with emotion. If you want to change minds, first touch souls. Because in the end, the most powerful persuasion doesn't happen in the head. It happens in the heart. Win that, and the mind will follow. Here's a truth that took me years to understand. Resistance isn't the enemy of influence. It's the gateway to it. When someone pushes back against your ideas, they're not being difficult. They're showing you exactly what you need to address. To be persuasive. Think about water meeting a rock in a stream. The water doesn't fight the rock. It doesn't try to break through it. It flows around it, finding the path of least resistance. This is the secret to disarming resistance. Don't fight it. Flow with it. I remember working with a manager who was trying to implement a new reporting system. Every time she encountered resistance, she pushed harder. Every objection was met with counter-arguments. Every concern was dismissed with logic. And the more she pushed, the more her team pushed back. We completely transformed her approach using what I call the resistance resolution method. Instead of countering resistance, she learned to welcome it. Instead of fighting objections, she learned to explore them. Instead of dismissing concerns, she learned to dig deeper into them. The first step in this method is crucial. Acknowledge. the resistance, not grudgingly, not defensively, but genuinely. When someone objects to your idea, start with, "I understand why you might feel that way," or "That's a legitimate concern." And here's the key, you must mean it. I once worked with a company implementing a major change initiative. The leadership team was frustrated because employees kept raising objections. "They're just resistant to change," was the common complaint. But when we really listened to the objections, we discovered they weren't resistant to change. They were resistant to uncertainty. Instead of trying to overcome their resistance, we made it the focus of our attention. We created forums where people could express their concerns openly. We acknowledged every objection as valuable feedback. We treated resistance not as an obstacle to overcome, but as intelligence to gather. The result? The same people who had been resisting the change became its greatest champions. Why? Because they felt heard, because their concerns were treated as valid, because their resistance was respected, not rejected. Here's something fascinating about human psychology. The moment you acknowledge someone's resistance, it begins to dissolve. It's like a martial art. You use the energy of the resistance rather than fighting against it. Let me share a powerful technique I've developed for handling resistance. I call it the 3 A's. Acknowledge. Start by validating their concern. "I understand why you might see it that way." Align. Find a point of agreement, no matter how small. "You're right that we need to be careful about." Advance. Only then move forward together. Given that, how might we? I remember a sales professional who was struggling with customer objections about price. Every time a customer said, "It's too expensive," he would launch into a defense of the value proposition. And every time he did this, the resistance grew stronger. We transformed his approach using the 3 A's. When he heard, "It's too expensive," he would start with, "I understand. This is a significant investment." Acknowledge. Then he would say, "You're right to be careful about how you allocate your budget." Align. Only then would he ask, "Given that, may I share how other companies have found this investment pays for itself?" Advance. His sales increased dramatically. Why? Because he learned to flow with resistance rather than fight it. Here's another crucial aspect of handling resistance. Look for the fear behind it. Almost all resistance is rooted in some form of fear. Fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of change, fear of looking foolish. When you address the underlying fear, the resistance often dissolves naturally. I worked with a team implementing new technology. The obvious resistance was about the complexity of the system. But when we dug deeper, we discovered the real fear. People were worried about looking incompetent while learning the new system. Once we understood this, we completely redesigned the implementation. Instead of focusing on the system's capabilities, we focused on making people feel confident and competent. We created safe spaces for practice. We celebrated small wins. We made it okay to make mistakes while learning. The resistance melted away. Why? Because we addressed the fear beneath it. Here's a challenge for you. In your next encounter with resistance, make it your goal to understand it completely before trying to overcome it. Ask questions like, "Tell me more about your concerns. What worries you most about this? What would need to be true for you to feel comfortable with this?" Remember, resistance is information. It's feedback. It's your guide to understanding what matters to people, what worries them, what they need to feel secure and supported. When you approach resistance this way, as valuable intelligence rather than annoying obstruction, something remarkable happens. The very people who were resisting you become your allies in finding solutions. The very concerns that were blocking progress become the key to making progress. Because in the end, the goal isn't to overcome resistance, it's to transform it. Not to fight it, but to flow with it. Not to dismiss it, but to learn from it. When you master this art, resistance stops being your enemy and becomes your ally in creating lasting change. There's a principle in influence so powerful yet so counterintuitive that most people never discover it. The fastest way to get someone to change their mind is to first agree with them. This isn't about manipulation or compromise. It's about creating a bridge of understanding that makes real influence possible. Let me share a story that transformed my understanding of this principle. Years ago, I was working with two executives locked in a fierce disagreement about their company's strategy. Each was convinced the other was wrong. Each was determined to prove their point, and each was getting nowhere. I noticed something fascinating. They were so focused on proving the other person wrong that they missed several points of agreement. When we helped them start with these points of agreement, even small ones, something remarkable happened. The tension dissolved, the defensiveness melted away, and suddenly, real dialogue became possible. This is what I call the agreement first principle. Before you try to influence anyone's thinking, first find something, anything, you can genuinely agree with. Even if you disagree with 99% of what they're saying, find the 1% you can agree with and start there. I worked with a manager who was constantly butting heads with her team about process changes. Every suggestion was met with objections. Every proposal sparked debate. She was getting frustrated, and her team was getting defensive. We transformed her approach using 3 simple words. You're right that every time someone raised an objection, she would start with these words, followed by whatever part of their concern she could honestly agree with. You're right that we need to be careful about changing things that are working. You're right that training will take time away from other priorities. You're right that we should consider the impact on our customers. The change was dramatic. The same team that had resisted every suggestion now became engaged in finding solutions. Why? Because agreement creates safety. When people feel you understand and respect their perspective, they become open to considering yours. Here's something crucial to understand about agreement. It doesn't mean you have to abandon your position. It means you're creating a foundation of understanding from which influence becomes possible. It's like building a bridge. You start from where they are, not where you want them to be. Let me share a powerful technique I've developed for mastering the art of agreement. I call it the 3 levels of agreement: surface agreement, find. Something factual you can agree with. You're right that the numbers show. Emotional agreement, acknowledge the validity of their feelings. I understand why you'd feel frustrated by. Principle agreement, connect with their underlying values. I share your commitment to. I remember working with a sales team that was struggling with customer objections. Their instinct was to counter every objection with a feature or benefit. Instead, we taught them to start with agreement. When a customer said, "This seems complicated," instead of defending the product's simplicity, they learned to say, "You're right. It's important that any new system be easy to use. May I show you how we've addressed that?" Their sales improved dramatically. Why? Because agreement disarms defense. When you're not fighting against someone's perspective, they don't need to fight to defend it. Here's another powerful aspect of agreement. It helps you understand the other person's position more deeply. When you look for points of agreement, you naturally become more curious about their perspective. You start asking better questions. You discover nuances you might have missed. I worked with a CEO who was trying to convince his board to invest in a new market opportunity. His initial presentation was met with skepticism. Instead of pushing harder, we helped him find points of agreement with each board member's concerns. He agreed that due diligence was crucial. He agreed that timing was important. He agreed that protecting the core business was essential. From these points of agreement, he was able to show how his proposal actually addressed each of these concerns. The board approved his proposal. Why? Because he built his case on a foundation of agreement rather than argument. Here's a challenge for you. In your next disagreement, make it your goal to find 3 things you can genuinely agree with before making any counterpoints. They don't have to be big things. They don't have to be central to the argument. They just have to be honest. Points of agreement. Remember, agreement is not surrender. It's not about giving up your position or compromising your principles. It's about creating a space where real influence becomes possible. It's about building trust through understanding. It's about showing respect for another's perspective even when you see things differently. And here's something fascinating. When you master the art of agreement, you often discover that the distance between your position and theirs isn't as great as you thought. You find common ground you didn't know existed. You discover solutions that neither of you saw before, because in the end, influence isn't about winning arguments. It's about building bridges. And agreement is the strongest building material we have. When you start with agreement, you create a foundation that can support real change, real growth, real transformation. So before you think about how to change someone's mind, first find ways to agree with it. Before you try to influence their thinking, first honor their perspective. Before you seek to persuade, first seek to understand. This is the art of agreement, and it's the key to lasting influence. There's a principle of influence so powerful that overlooking it can destroy relationships, while mastering it can move mountains, the need to save face. In all my years of studying human behavior, I have never found anything more important to handling people successfully than allowing them to maintain their sense of dignity and self-respect. Think about it. How do you feel when someone proves you wrong in front of others? When someone points out your mistakes in a public meeting? When someone challenges your judgment in ways that make you look foolish? That feeling, that burning. Need to defend your dignity. That's what we're talking about when we talk about face. I remember working with a brilliant executive who couldn't understand why his team had become so resistant to his input. He was usually right in his criticisms. His observations were accurate, his suggestions were sound. But he had a habit of pointing out mistakes in team meetings, of correcting errors in front of colleagues, of highlighting flaws in public settings. He was winning arguments, but losing influence. He was right about the issues, but wrong about the approach. He was saving pennies of correctness while spending dollars of relationship capital. We transformed his approach using what I call the private victory, public honor principle. Corrections happened in private. Praise happened in public. Mistakes were discussed one-on-one. Successes were celebrated in team settings. The change in his team's response was remarkable. The same people who had grown defensive and resistant now became open and receptive. Why? Because he learned to help them save face. Here's something crucial to understand about face. It's not about being nice or polite. It's about understanding a fundamental human need, the need to maintain self-respect and the respect of others. When you threaten someone's face, you trigger resistance that no amount of logic can overcome. I once worked with a company implementing a major system change. The technical team had found numerous errors in how departments were using the old system. Their initial approach was to document all these errors and present them in a company-wide meeting to make sure everyone understood what needed to change. Can you imagine the resistance this created? Every department felt attacked. Every manager felt criticized. Every employee felt exposed. The more the technical team tried to force their points, the more people dug in to defend their practices. We completely rebuilt their approach using what I call the 3 preserves of face. Private correction, address mistakes and problems in private, one-on-one settings. Public acknowledgement, recognize efforts and progress in group settings. Future focus, frame changes in terms of improvement rather than correction. Instead of pointing out errors, they started asking about challenges. Instead of highlighting mistakes, they sought input on solutions. Instead of exposing problems, they invited collaboration on improvements. The same changes that had met fierce resistance were now embraced enthusiastically. Why? Because they learned to help people save face while making necessary changes. Here's another powerful technique for preserving face, the art of indirect correction. Instead of saying, "You're wrong about this," learn to say, "Have you considered this perspective?" Instead of, "That won't work," try, "What if we looked at it this way?" I remember a sales manager who was frustrated with one of his top performers. The salesperson was using high-pressure tactics that were creating customer complaints. The manager's first instinct was to confront him directly about his inappropriate behavior. Instead, we helped him reframe the conversation. Rather than criticizing the current approach, he shared stories about customers who had become long-term advocates because they never felt pressured. Rather than pointing out what was wrong, he painted a picture of what could be better. The salesperson changed his approach voluntarily. Why? Because he was able to save face. He wasn't wrong, he was learning. He wasn't failing, he was growing. Here's something fascinating about face. When you help others preserve it, they often become more willing to admit mistakes and accept criticism. It's paradoxical but true. The more secure people feel about their dignity, the more open they all become to change. I worked with a team leader who needed to address performance issues with a longtime employee. Instead of focusing on what the employee was doing wrong, she started by acknowledging his years of contribution. Instead of demanding immediate change, she invited his input on how to improve results. The same employee who had grown defensive about previous feedback now became engaged in finding solutions. Why? Because his dignity was protected, his value was affirmed, his face was saved. Here's a challenge for you. In your next interaction, where you need to correct someone or address a problem, make preserving dignity your first priority. Before you think about what needs to change, think about how to protect their sense of self-respect. Ask yourself, how can I address this privately? What can I acknowledge positively? How can I frame this as growth rather than correction? Remember, face is like trust. It takes time to build, but can be destroyed in a moment. Every time you help someone save face, you build influence. Every time you cause someone to lose face, you create resistance that can last for years. Because in the end, influence isn't about being right, it's about being effective. It's not about winning arguments, it's about winning allies. It's not about proving points, it's about improving situations. And nothing does this better than helping others maintain their dignity while making necessary changes. When you master this art, when you become known as someone who helps others save face, you develop a kind of influence that no amount of authority can match. People will accept your guidance, welcome your feedback, and embrace your suggestions, not because they have to, but because you've shown them respect when it mattered most. Here's a truth about human nature that's so powerful it can transform lives. People will become what you expect them to be. Give someone a reputation to live up to, and more often than not, they'll move heaven and earth to become that person. This isn't just positive thinking. It's one of the most potent tools of influence ever discovered. Let me share a story that changed my understanding of this principle forever. Years ago, I worked with a high school teacher who was assigned the problem class. The students other teachers had given up on. Instead of accepting this reputation, she did something remarkable. She told them they were the leadership class. I requested this class, she told them on the first day, because I heard you were independent thinkers, people who question things, people who don't just accept what they're told. Those are exactly the qualities great leaders need. Was she being naive? Not at all. She was deliberately giving them a new reputation to live up to. And something extraordinary happened. These same students who had been labeled difficult began to see themselves differently. They started asking challenging questions instead of making challenging behavior. They began leading discussions instead of disrupting them. This is what I call the reputation effect. When you give people a positive reputation to live up to, you create a powerful force for change. But here's what's crucial. It must be based on some truth, some seed of reality that can grow into something greater. I remember working with a manager who was frustrated with an employee's lack of initiative. He just waits to be told what to do, she complained. But when we looked closer, we discovered occasions, even small ones, where this employee had shown initiative. We helped the manager reframe her approach. Instead of focusing on his lack of initiative, she started acknowledging his thoughtful approach to problems. She began treating him as someone who considered implications carefully before acting. She gave him a reputation for being thorough rather than hesitant. The transformation was remarkable. The same employee who had seemed passive began offering suggestions, thinking ahead, anticipating issues. Why? Because he was living up to the reputation he'd been given. Here's something fascinating about human psychology. We all have multiple potential selves within us. The self that emerges depends largely on which version others expect to see. This isn't about manipulation, it's about illumination. It's about shining a light on the best possibilities within people. Let me share a powerful technique I've developed for using this principle. I call it the 3 elements of reputation building. Identity. Give people a positive identity to embrace. You're someone who really thinks things through. Evidence. Point out examples that support this identity, even small ones. I noticed how carefully you considered all angles in that situation. Opportunity. Create chances to reinforce this identity. Given your thoughtful approach, I'd love your perspective on this challenge. I worked with a sales team leader who was trying to improve his team's performance. Instead of focusing on what they were doing wrong, he began introducing them to clients as our problem-solving specialists. Instead of criticizing their mistakes, he started highlighting moments when they found creative solutions. Their performance improved dramatically. Why? Because they had a new reputation to live up to. They stopped seeing themselves as struggling salespeople and started seeing themselves as problem-solving experts. Here's another crucial aspect of this principle. The reputation you give must be slightly ahead of current reality, but not so far ahead that it seems unreachable. It's like helping someone climb stairs. You want the next step to be a stretch, but not a leap. I remember working with a young professional who was terrified of public speaking. Instead of dismissing her fears or pushing her too hard, her mentor gave her a reputation for being thoughtfully articulate in group discussions. This was true. She did express herself well in small groups, but it also suggested potential for more. Gradually, this young woman began volunteering to speak in larger settings. The same person who had avoided public speaking now sought opportunities for it. Why? Because she was living up to a reputation that honored both who she was and who she could become. Here's a challenge for you. Think about someone you're trying to influence, a colleague, a team member, a child. What positive reputation could you give them that's both true to who they are and inspiring to who they could be? Remember these key principles. Make it true. Find real evidence, even small examples, that support the reputation you're giving. Make it aspirational. Let the reputation point toward growth while remaining connected to current reality. Make it stick. Consistently reinforce this reputation through your words and actions. I worked with a company that was trying to improve customer service. Instead of criticizing poor performance, they began introducing their service team as our customer experience experts. They shared stories of positive customer interactions. They created opportunities for team members to suggest improvements. The same team that had been defensive about customer complaints became proactive about customer solutions. Why? Because they had a reputation to live up to. Here's something powerful to understand. When you give someone a positive reputation, you're not just influencing their behavior, you're helping them discover their potential. You're not just managing performance, you're inspiring growth. Think about it. How differently do you behave when someone believes in you? How much harder do you try when someone sees your potential? How much more do you achieve when someone expects your success? This isn't about flattery or false praise. It's about seeing the best in people and helping them see it too. It's about recognizing potential and creating conditions for it to flourish. It's about understanding that people often become what we expect them to become. Remember, the reputations we give others are like seeds we plant in their minds. Plant seeds of doubt and you'll harvest insecurity. Plant seeds of trust, and you'll harvest reliability. Plant seeds of leadership, and you'll harvest initiative. Because in the end, the greatest influence we can have is not in forcing people to change, but in helping them become who they're capable of being. When you master this art, When you learn to give people reputations that inspire growth, you don't just influence behavior, you transform lives. There's a fundamental truth about human nature that most people never grasp. No one likes to be told what to do. The moment you command, you create resistance. But when you suggest, you open doors to influence that command could never reach. Let me share a story that perfectly illustrates this principle. I once worked with a senior executive who was known for his direct commanding style. Do this, do that, make it happen, was his approach. And while people complied with his orders, something was missing: initiative, creativity, genuine engagement. We transformed his approach using what I call the art of suggestion. Instead of "have this report on my desk by Friday," he learned to say, "What do you think about having this ready by Friday?" Instead of "you need to fix these errors," he began asking, "How do you think we could improve this?" The change in his team's response was immediate and profound. The same people who had been doing the minimum now began exceeding expectations. The same staff who had waited for instructions now started proposing solutions. Why? Because suggestion invites ownership while command demands compliance. This isn't about being soft or indirect. It's about understanding a fundamental principle of influence. People support what they help create. When you use suggestion, you're inviting people to become co-creators of the solution rather than mere executors of commands. I remember working with a mother who was struggling with her teenage son's messy room. Every command to clean it was met with resistance or minimal compliance. We helped her shift to suggestion. I wonder how this room could be arranged to make it easier to keep organized. The same boy who had resisted commands began generating ideas for organizing his space. Here's a powerful technique I've developed for mastering the art of suggestion. I call it the 3 layers of suggestion. Question layer: what if we tried? Possibility layer: one approach might be. Invitation layer: how would you feel about? Each layer creates more space for the other person to engage, to think, to own the outcome. I worked with a sales manager who was trying to improve his team's follow-up with customers. His first instinct was to mandate a new system of daily reports. Instead, we helped him use suggestion. "I'm curious, what do you think would help us stay better connected with our customers?" The team not only created a better system than he had planned to impose, they enthusiastically implemented it because it was their idea. This is the magic of suggestion. It transforms resistance into resourcefulness. Here's something fascinating about suggestion. It works even when you have the authority to command. In fact, it works especially well then, because it shows respect for the other person's intelligence and capability. I remember a CEO who needed to implement major changes in his organization. He had the authority to simply mandate these changes. Instead, he used suggestion. "I've been thinking about where we need to go as a company. I'd value your thoughts on how we might get there." The result? His leadership team didn't just implement the changes, they improved upon them. They didn't just follow the plan, they owned it. Why? Because suggestion invited their intelligence rather than demanding their compliance. Here's another powerful aspect of suggestion. It allows people to save face when they need to change course. Instead of "you're doing this wrong," try "have you considered this approach?" Instead of "this isn't working," ask "what if we looked at it differently?" I worked with a team leader who needed to address quality issues in his department. Rather than criticizing current practices, he used suggestion. "I've been wondering if there might be ways to make our quality checks even more effective. What are your thoughts?" The same team that might have become defensive about criticism became engaged in finding solutions. Why? Because suggestion preserved their dignity while inviting their involvement. Here's a challenge for you. Take 3 situations where you would normally give commands and transform them into suggestions. Remember, make it open-ended. Leave room for the other person's ideas and input. Make it inviting. Create space for genuine engagement. Make it respectful. Show that you value their intelligence and capability. Remember, suggestion isn't about being indirect or unclear. It's about being smart about how humans actually work. It's about understanding that the best way to get someone to do something is to make them want to do it. Think about how you respond when someone tells you what to do. Now think about how you respond when someone asks for your thoughts on solving a problem. That difference in feeling, that's the power of suggestion. This principle works everywhere, in business, in family life, in any human interaction. When you want your children to develop good habits, suggestion works better than command. When you want your team to improve their performance, suggestion works better than criticism. When you want your colleagues to support your ideas, suggestion works better than demands. Because in the end, influence isn't about making people do things, it's about making them want to do things. It's not about exercising power, it's about engaging potential. It's not about commanding action, it's about inspiring initiative. When you master this art, when you learn to use suggestion instead of command, you don't just get compliance. You get commitment. You don't just get action, you get engagement. You don't just get results, you get relationships that make lasting influence possible. In all my years of studying human influence, I've discovered this profound truth. Facts may convince, but stories transform. You can present all the data in the world, all the logical arguments, all the rational reasons, but nothing moves people like a well-told story. Let me share something that happened years ago that opened my eyes to this principle. I was working with a company trying to implement new safety procedures. The management team had created detailed presentations filled with statistics about accident prevention. They had graphs showing potential cost savings. They had charts displaying efficiency improvements. But nothing seemed to motivate real change. Then, one day, a veteran worker stood up and shared a story. He told about the day he almost lost his hand because he skipped a safety check. He described the moment he realized what could have happened, how his daughter's upcoming wedding flashed before his eyes, how he imagined never being able to walk her down the aisle. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The same safety procedures that had been met with resistance were suddenly embraced with commitment. Why? Because a story had transformed abstract rules into human reality. This is what I call the story effect. While facts speak to the mind, stories speak to the heart. And it's the heart that drives action. But here's what's crucial. Not all stories are created equal. The most powerful stories for influence follow what I call the 4 elements of transformative. Storytelling. Human element. Make your story about people, not just events or ideas. Emotional truth. Touch genuine feelings that resonate with universal human experiences. Specific detail. Use concrete details that make the story real and memorable. Clear purpose. Connect the story directly to the change or action you want to. Inspire. I remember working with a sales leader who was trying to motivate his team to spend more time building relationships with clients. Instead of lecturing about customer retention statistics, he shared a story about a client who became a lifelong friend because of one extra phone call, one moment of going beyond the transaction. His team's approach to client relationships transformed. Why? Because the story made the abstract concept of relationship building concrete and human. Here's something fascinating about storytelling. Our brains are literally wired for it. When we hear a good story, our neurons fire in the same patterns as if we were experiencing the events ourselves. This is why stories are so much more memorable and persuasive than facts alone. I worked with a CEO who needed to convince his board to invest in employee development during a tough financial period. Instead of just presenting ROI figures, he told stories of specific employees whose growth had created breakthrough innovations for the company. He shared moments where investment in people had paid unexpected dividends. The board approved the investment. Why? Because stories had transformed abstract expenses into concrete human potential. Here's another powerful aspect of storytelling. It allows people to discover truth for themselves. Instead of telling someone what to think or do, a well-chosen story lets them reach their own conclusions. I remember a team leader who was trying to improve collaboration between departments. Rather than preaching about teamwork, she shared a story about a project where lack of collaboration had led to a major setback, and another where unexpected cooperation had created remarkable success. The teams began finding ways to work together on their own. Why? Because the stories had shown them the value of collaboration more powerfully than any directive could have. Here's a crucial technique for influential storytelling that I call the 3 bridges. Connection bridge, start, with elements that connect to your audience's experience. Transformation, bridge, show how change or new understanding emerged. Action bridge, link the story's lesson to specific actions or decisions. I worked with a manager who needed to convince his team to adopt new technology. Instead of focusing on features and benefits, he shared stories of other teams who had initially resisted change but then discovered unexpected advantages. He told specific stories about how the technology had made their work not just more efficient, but more interesting and rewarding. The resistance to change melted away. Why? Because stories had transformed threatening change into exciting opportunity. Here's a challenge for you. Identify 3 key messages you need to communicate, and find personal stories that illuminate these messages. Remember, make it personal. Use stories from your own experience or direct observation. Make it relevant. Choose stories that connect directly to your audience's situation. Make it actionable. Ensure your stories point clearly to desired changes or decisions. Remember, we are all storytellers by nature. It's how we make sense of the world, how we learn, how we connect with others. When you harness this natural power, you tap into one of the most ancient and effective tools of influence. Think about the last time you were truly influenced to change your mind or behavior. Chances are, it wasn't because of a PowerPoint presentation or a logical argument. It was probably because of a story, someone's experience, someone's journey, someone's transformation that spoke to you personally. This principle works everywhere, in business, in leadership, in personal relationships. Want to change organizational culture? Share stories of people living the values you want to instill. Want to improve team performance? Tell stories of moments when excellence made a difference. Want to inspire innovation? Share stories of creative breakthroughs and the journey to achieve them. Because in the end, influence isn't about presenting information, it's about creating transformation. It's not about telling people what to think. It's about showing them what's possible. It's not about forcing change. It's about inspiring it. When you master this art, when you learn to tell stories that matter, stories that move, stories that transform, you don't just communicate ideas. You create experiences. You don't just share information. You shape understanding. You don't just influence thoughts. You inspire action. Of all the tools of influence I've studied over the years, none is more powerful or more consistently underused than genuine praise and encouragement. Most people know that criticism wounds, but few truly understand how praise transforms. It's not just about making people feel good. It's about unleashing potential that might otherwise remain forever dormant. Let me share a story that changed my understanding of this principle forever. I worked with a manager who had a unique approach to turning around struggling employees. Instead of focusing on their mistakes, she became a detective of their successes. No achievement was too small to notice. No effort was too minor to acknowledge. "I saw how you handled that difficult customer yesterday," she would say. "The patience you showed, the way you stayed focused on finding a solution, that was exactly what we need more of." The transformation in her team was remarkable. People who had been defensive became receptive. Those who had been disengaged became enthusiastic. Why? Because she had mastered what I call the praise principle. When you catch people doing something right and acknowledge it specifically, you create a compass that guides them toward excellence. But here's what's crucial about praise. It must be specific, it must be sincere, and it must be earned. Empty flattery is worse than no praise at all. People have an amazing radar for insincerity, and nothing destroys influence faster than fake appreciation. I remember working with a sales team leader who was trying to improve his team's performance. Instead of just criticizing poor results, he started noticing and naming specific positive behaviors. I appreciate how you prepared for that client meeting. The research you did, the questions you anticipated, that's the kind of thoroughness that builds long-term relationships. His team's performance improved dramatically. Why? Because praise had shown them exactly what excellence looked like in practical, specific terms. Here's something fascinating about the psychology of praise. It works even with people who claim not to need it. Even the most self-sufficient among us are moved by genuine appreciation. It's not about ego, it's about confirmation that our efforts matter, that someone notices our contribution. I developed a technique for effective praise that I call the 3 dimensions of recognition. Specific action, name exactly what was done well. Positive impact, highlight the difference it made. Personal quality, connect it to a character trait or skill. For example, the way you followed up with that client, specific action, helped us secure the contract, positive impact. Your attention to detail and persistence, personal qualities, made all the difference. I worked with a teacher who transformed her challenging class using this approach. Instead of just saying, "good job," she would say things like, "the way you kept working on that problem, even when it was difficult, action, helped you find the solution, impact." That kind of persistence, quality, is exactly what successful students have. The same students who had been reluctant learners became eager participants. Why? Because specific praise had shown them not just what to do, but who they could become. Here's another powerful aspect of praise: timing. The best praise comes as close as possible to the behavior you want to reinforce. I call this the moment of excellence, that brief window when someone has just done something praiseworthy and is most receptive to having it acknowledged. I remember a CEO who made it a practice to send brief, specific notes of appreciation within 24 hours of noticing. Excellent work. Not formal recognition awards, not annual review comments, immediate, specific acknowledgement of work. Well done. The impact on his organization was profound. People began to excel not because they had to, but because they wanted to. They knew their efforts would be noticed and appreciated. Here's a challenge for you. For the next week, become a detective of excellence. Look for specific things people do well. When you find them, acknowledge them using the 3 dimensions of recognition. Remember, make it immediate. Don't wait for formal reviews or special occasions. Make it specific. Point out exactly what was done well. Make it personal. Connect it to the individual's qualities and potential. But here's something crucial to understand. Praise isn't just about acknowledging past performance. It's about inspiring future excellence. When you praise specific behaviors and qualities, you're essentially saying, "This is what success looks like. This is who you can be. This is what excellence means in practice." I worked with a parent who was struggling with a child's behavior. Instead of focusing on corrections, we helped her become an observer of positive moments. I noticed how you helped your little sister when she was frustrated. That kind of kindness and patience shows real maturity. The child's behavior began to improve, not because of punishment or rewards, but because praise had illuminated a path to being their best self. Remember, criticism may create compliance, but praise creates commitment. Correction may stop negative behaviors, but encouragement inspires positive ones. Judgment may force change, but appreciation invites growth. This principle works everywhere. Yoritoit, business, in education, in relationships. Want to improve team performance? Catch people doing things right and acknowledge it specifically. Want to develop leadership? Notice and name moments of good judgment and initiative. Want to strengthen relationships? Become an expert at seeing and celebrating what others do well. Because in the end, influence isn't about pointing out what's wrong. It's about illuminating what's right. It's not about fixing weaknesses. It's about amplifying strengths. It's not about changing who people are. It's about helping them become more of who they can be. When you master this art, when you learn to praise specifically, sincerely, and strategically, you don't just make people feel good. You show them a vision of their best selves. You don't just acknowledge excellence. You create it. You don't just influence behavior. You transform potential into reality. Here's a paradox that took me years to understand. The most powerful influence often comes not from displaying strength, but from showing vulnerability. In our quest to appear perfect, to never show weakness, to always have the right answer, we actually diminish our ability to connect with and influence others. Let me share a moment that transformed my understanding of this principle. I was working with a senior executive who was struggling to connect with his team. He had an impressive track record, commanding presence, and seemingly unlimited confidence. Yet something was missing. His team respected him, but they didn't trust him. They followed his directions, but they didn't share their real thoughts or concerns. Everything changed the day he did something unexpected. He admitted he was wrong about a major decision, shared how he had learned from the mistake, and asked for his team's help in finding a better way forward. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The same people who had been guarded and distant suddenly became engaged and supportive. This is what I call the vulnerability effect. When you have the courage to be genuinely vulnerable, to admit mistakes, share uncertainties, acknowledge limitations, you create a space for real connection and authentic influence. But here's what's crucial about vulnerability. It must be genuine, it must be appropriate, and it must serve a purpose. This isn't about emotional dumping or professional confessional. It's about strategic authenticity that builds trust and creates deeper connections. I remember working with a sales leader who was trying to help his team handle rejection better. Instead of just giving them techniques, he shared his own story of early failures and how they had shaped his approach. "I still remember my first 20 rejections," he said. "Each one felt like proof I wasn't cut out for this. But here's what I learned." His team's resilience improved dramatically. Why? Because vulnerability had transformed abstract advice into lived experience. His willingness to share his struggles made his success more believable and achievable. Here's something fascinating about vulnerability. It actually increases your influence by making you more relatable and trustworthy. When you admit what you don't know, people are more likely to believe you about what you do know. I developed a technique for effective vulnerability that I call the 3 levels of professional openness, learning vulnerability. Share lessons from mistakes and failures. Process vulnerability. Be open about current challenges and uncertainties. Personal vulnerability. Connect professional situations to human experiences. I worked with a CEO who transformed his company's culture using these levels. Instead of presenting himself as all-knowing, he regularly shared what he was learning. Instead of hiding challenges, he discussed them openly and invited input. Instead of maintaining professional distance, he connected his leadership journey to his personal growth. The impact was profound. The same organization that had been marked by political maneuvering and information hoarding became known for collaboration and innovation. Why? Because vulnerability at the top had created safety throughout the system. Here's another powerful aspect of vulnerability. It gives others permission to be authentic too. When a leader admits uncertainty, it becomes okay for others to not have all the answers. When a manager shares challenges, it becomes safe for team members to discuss difficulties. I remember a team leader who was trying to improve problem solving in his department. Instead of just pushing for solutions, he started each meeting by sharing his own questions and uncertainties. "Here's what I'm struggling with," he would say. "I'd really value your perspectives on this." The quality of discussion improved dramatically. People stopped posturing and started problem solving. Why? Because vulnerability had created a space where real thinking could happen. Here's a challenge for you. Identify 3 situations this week where appropriate vulnerability could deepen your influence. Remember, make it relevant. Share experiences that connect to current situations. Make it purposeful. Be clear about how your vulnerability serves others. Make it balanced. Combine openness about challenges with confidence in finding solutions. But here's something crucial to understand. Vulnerability isn't about appearing weak. It's about being authentic. It's not about exposing every doubt and fear. It's about sharing what serves the moment and the relationship. I worked with a mentor who had a powerful way of using vulnerability to develop others. When someone came to him with a challenge, he would often share a similar struggle from his own journey, not to make it about him, but to make learning possible. "I faced something like this early in my career," he would say. "Here's what I got wrong at first, what I learned, and how it shaped my approach. But your situation might be different. Tell me more about what you're seeing." His influence grew not despite his vulnerability, but because of it. Why? Because his openness about his journey made him a more credible guide for others. Remember, we live in a world that often equates influence with perfection, authority with certainty. But real influence comes from connection, and real connection requires vulnerability. When you pretend to be perfect, you create distance. When you share your humanity, you build bridges. This principle works everywhere, in leadership, in relationships, in any situation where you want to have real influence. Want to mentor effectively? Share your own learning journey? Want to lead change? Be open about your own adaptation process. Want to build trust? Show appropriate vulnerability in how you handle challenges, because in the end, influence isn't about creating an image of perfection. It's about creating spaces for real growth and connection. It's not about having all the answers. It's about being authentic in the search for solutions. It's not about never showing weakness. It's about showing how to learn and grow through challenges. When you master this art, when you learn to be strategically vulnerable in service of others' growth, you don't just influence behavior. You create trust. You don't just lead by example. You lead by authentic connection. You don't just show others what to do. You show them who they can become by being real about who you are. In all my years of studying influence, I've observed this truth. The person who stays calm in any situation is the person others will follow. When tensions rise, when stakes are high, when emotions threaten to overwhelm, the ability to maintain composure becomes your greatest source of influence. Let me share a story that perfectly illustrates this principle. I once worked with a crisis management team during a major product recall. Millions of dollars were at stake. Media scrutiny was intense. Careers hung in the balance. In the midst of this chaos, one leader stood out, not because she was the most senior, but because she was the calmest. While others rushed to react, she would pause, think, then respond. While others let anxiety drive their decisions, she maintained a steady, deliberate approach. Her composure didn't just help her make better decisions, it became a source of stability for the entire team. This is what I call the calm effect. When you maintain your composure under pressure, you don't just think more clearly, you become a center of gravity that helps others stay grounded too. But here's what's crucial. Staying calm isn't about being emotionless. It's about managing emotions skillfully. I remember working with an executive who prided himself on never showing emotion during crises. But his type of calm, rigid, forced, unnatural, actually increased tension in his team. True composure isn't about suppressing emotions, it's about channeling them productively. Here's a powerful technique I've developed for maintaining genuine calm under pressure. I call it the 3 centers of composure. Physical center, control your breathing, posture, and movement. Mental center, manage your thoughts and focus your attention. Emotional center, channel feelings into constructive responses. I worked with a negotiator who used these centers masterfully. Before difficult meetings, she would consciously adjust. Her breathing, physical. She would remind herself of her key objectives, mental. She would acknowledge her anxiety, but focus it into heightened awareness, emotional. The results were remarkable. Even in the most contentious situations, her composure gave her influence that no amount of argumentation could achieve. Why? Because calm is contagious, and so is panic. When you choose calm, you help others choose it too. Here's something fascinating about staying calm under pressure. It's not about being unaffected by stress, it's about responding to it skillfully. The goal isn't to eliminate stress, but to use it as a resource for heightened performance. I remember a surgeon who taught his residents a powerful lesson about this. Notice the tension you feel before a difficult procedure, he would say. Don't fight it. Don't try to eliminate it. Transform it into focused attention. Let it make you more precise, more aware, more present. His residents learned to perform better not because they became stress-free, but because they learned to channel stress productively. This is the essence of true composure, not the absence of pressure, but the skilled management of it. Here's another crucial aspect of staying calm: the power of the strategic pause. In moments of high pressure, most people rush to act, to speak, to decide, but often the most influential response is to pause, to create space for clarity to emerge. I worked with a CEO who transformed his leadership through this simple practice. When faced with crisis or conflict, he would consciously pause before responding. Not a long pause, just a moment to breathe, to think, to choose his response rather than react. His influence grew dramatically. Why? Because his pauses created space for wisdom to emerge. His composure under pressure became a model for his entire organization. Here's a challenge for you. Identify 3 situations that typically trigger us, stress or tension for you. For each one, develop a specific strategy using the 3 centers of composure. Remember, physical. What will you do with your body? Breathing, posture, movement. Mental. What will you focus your thoughts on? Objectives. Priorities, perspective. Emotional. How will you channel your feelings productively? Awareness, empathy, resolve. But here's something crucial to understand. Staying calm under pressure isn't about becoming impassive or detached. It's about remaining fully engaged while maintaining your center. It's about being both present to the situation and grounded in yourself. I worked with a team leader who faced a crisis when a major project was at risk of failing. Instead of letting panic drive decisions, she gathered her team and said, "This is a difficult moment. We're all feeling the pressure. Let's use that energy to sharpen our focus and find solutions together." Her calm acknowledgement of both the situation and the emotions involved helped her team move from anxiety to action. Why? Because true composure acknowledges reality while maintaining perspective. Remember, in any high-pressure situation, people will look for cues about how to respond. If you panic, you give others permission to panic. If you remain calm, you show others that composure is possible. This principle works everywhere, in business, in relationships, in any situation where pressure threatens to overwhelm reason. Want to lead through crisis? Stay calm and help others find their center. Want to resolve conflicts? Let your composure create space for solutions. Want to influence outcomes? Let your steadiness show others the way forward. Because in the end, influence isn't about having all the answers. It's about maintaining the composure to find them. It's not about never feeling pressure. It's about handling pressure skillfully. It's not about being perfect. It's about being steadfast when perfection isn't possible. When you master this art, when you learn to stay calm under pressure, you don't just manage stress better. You become a source of stability for others. You don't just handle crises. You help others handle them too. You don't just maintain your own composure. You create an environment where composure becomes the natural response to pressure. In a world that often feels like it's spinning faster and faster, your calm becomes a gift to others. Your composure becomes a compass pointing toward solutions. Your steadiness becomes a foundation others can build on. Of all the tools of influence I've studied over the years, perhaps the most powerful and most overlooked is strategic silence. In our rush to speak, to persuade, to fill every moment with words, we often miss the extraordinary influence that can come from simply staying quiet at the right moment. Let me share an experience that opened my eyes to this principle. I was observing a master negotiator at work. What struck me wasn't what she said, it was what she didn't say. After making a proposal, she would sit in complete comfort with the silence that followed. While others might have rushed to fill that void with explanations or concessions, she simply waited. The effect was remarkable. Time and again, the other party would break the silence by making concessions or revealing crucial information. Her comfort with silence had created a space that others felt compelled to fill, often to her advantage. This is what I call the silence effect. When you master the art of strategic silence, you create spaces where truth can emerge, where others can reflect, where wisdom can surface. But here's what's crucial. Silence must be purposeful, comfortable, and appropriate to the moment. I remember working with a manager who was constantly trying to solve his team's problems by talking. More, explaining more, directing more. We helped him discover the power of the strategic pause, those moments when silence could do more than words ever could. Here's a powerful technique I've developed for mastering strategic silence. I call it the 3 silences of influence. Listening silence, when you want to truly understand, not just hear. Thinking silence, when you need to process before responding. Impact silence, when you want your words to have maximum effect. I worked with a counselor who used these silences masterfully. After a client shared something significant, she would maintain a listening silence, showing through her presence that she was truly absorbing what was said. When faced with a difficult question, she would take a thinking silence, demonstrating the value of reflection. After sharing an important insight, she would hold an impact silence, allowing her words to sink in fully. The transformation in her effectiveness was profound. Her clients began to share more deeply, think more carefully, and integrate insights more fully. Why? Because her strategic use of silence had created spaces for real change to occur. Here's something fascinating about silence. It often makes people uncomfortable because they're not used to it. But when you learn to be comfortable with silence, you gain a kind of influence that words alone can never achieve. I remember a CEO who transformed his leadership team meetings through the purposeful use of silence. Instead of filling every moment with discussion, he would sometimes ask a challenging question and then say, "Let's take 2 minutes to think about this silently before we respond." The quality of discussion improved dramatically. People stopped reacting and started reflecting. They stopped competing to speak and started thinking more deeply. Why? Because silence had created space for wisdom to emerge. Here's another powerful aspect of strategic silence. It can help you avoid the mistakes that come from speaking too quickly. In moments of tension or emotion, our first response isn't always our best response. Silence gives us time to choose our words more wisely. I worked with a conflict resolution specialist who taught me a valuable lesson about this. When emotions are high, she said, treat silence like a gift you give yourself, time to calm down, think clearly, and respond rather than react. Her success rate in resolving conflicts was extraordinary. Why? Because her strategic use of silence helped everyone involved move from reaction to reflection. Here's a challenge for you. Identify 3 situations this week where strategic silence could serve you better than immediate speech. Remember, make it purposeful. Know why you're being silent. Make it comfortable. Practice being at ease with silence. Make it appropriate. Match the length of silence to the situation. But here's something crucial to understand. Strategic silence isn't about being passive or withdrawing. It's about being fully present while choosing not to speak. It's about creating space for others to think, feel, and express themselves. I worked with a sales professional who discovered that his most powerful tool wasn't his pitch. It was his ability to stay silent after asking key questions. Instead of jumping in to fill any pause in the conversation, he learned to wait, to let clients process their thoughts, to give them space to reveal their real needs and concerns. His sales increased significantly. Why? Because silence had created space for genuine dialogue to emerge. Remember, in a world that's increasingly noisy, silence can be your secret weapon of influence. When others are rushing to speak, your thoughtful silence can speak volumes. When others are quick to react, your measured pause can demonstrate wisdom. This principle works everywhere, in negotiations, in relationships, in any situation where influence matters. Want to understand others better? Use listening silence. Want to make better decisions? Use thinking silence. Want your words to have more impact? Use impact silence. Because in the end, influence isn't just about what you say, it's about knowing when not to say anything. It's not just about filling space with words, it's about creating space for understanding. It's not just about speaking wisdom, it's about allowing wisdom to emerge in silence. When you master this art, when you learn to use silence strategically, you don't just communicate better. You create spaces where real communication can happen. You don't just influence through words. You influence through the powerful spaces. Between words, you don't just speak with impact. You let silence speak for you. In all my years of studying influence and persuasion, I've come to understand this fundamental truth. Lasting influence isn't about techniques or tactics. It's about who you become. People may follow positions of authority temporarily, but they willingly follow individuals who embody the qualities they admire and aspire to. Let me share a story that crystallized this principle for me. I once worked with two leaders in the same organization. Both had similar credentials, similar experience, similar authority. But one struggled to get buy-in for her initiatives, while the other seemed to generate enthusiastic support effortlessly. The difference? The second leader wasn't just trying to influence others. She had become the kind of person others naturally wanted to follow. She didn't just talk about integrity, she lived it. She didn't just preach excellence, she modeled it. She didn't just demand trust, she earned it through consistent, authentic behavior. This is what I call the character effect. When your words and actions align, when your public and private behavior match, when your values show up in everyday decisions, you create a kind of influence that no technique can match. But here's what's crucial. Becoming someone others want to follow isn't about perfection. It's about authenticity, consistency, and genuine care for others' success. It's about embodying the qualities that inspire trust and commitment. I remember working with an executive who was frustrated because his team wasn't embracing his vision for innovation. "I keep telling them to take risks," he said, "but they play it safe." When we examined his own behavior, we discovered he punished every failure and celebrated only successes. We helped him understand that influence flows from alignment, when your words and actions tell the same story. He began sharing his own failures and lessons learned. He started treating setbacks as learning opportunities. He made it safe for others to experiment and grow. The transformation was remarkable. His team began taking the kind of innovative risks he had been asking for. Why? Because he had become someone they wanted to follow into uncertainty. Here's something fascinating about being someone others want to follow. It's not about charisma or personality. It's about character, the consistent expression of values through behavior. I've developed what I call the 5 pillars of followable. Leadership, integrity, your words and actions align consistently. Empathy, you genuinely care about others' success. Competence, you continuously develop your capabilities. Vision, you see possibilities and inspire growth. Courage, you face challenges with honesty and resolve. I worked with a team leader who transformed her influence by focusing on these pillars. Instead of trying to prove she was always right, she focused on always being truthful, even when it meant admitting uncertainty or mistakes. Instead of just driving for results, she invested in her team's growth and success. Her influence grew exponentially. Why? Because she had become someone people wanted to follow, not someone they had to follow. Here's another powerful aspect of becoming followable. It simplifies influence. When people trust your character, they give you the benefit of the doubt. When they believe in your integrity, they listen more openly to your ideas. When they know you care about their success, they engage more willingly with your direction. I remember a manager who struggled with getting his team to embrace change. Every new initiative was met with skepticism and resistance. Through our work together, he realized he needed to focus less on selling change and more on being someone his team trusted to lead them through change. He started sharing more context about decisions. He began asking for and acting on feedback. He made himself available when team members had concerns. Most importantly, he demonstrated through consistent behavior that he cared about his team's success as much as his own. The resistance to change melted away. Why? Because he had become someone they trusted to lead them through uncertainty. Here's a challenge for you. Instead of focusing on how to influence others, focus on becoming someone worth following. Ask yourself, what qualities do I admire in those who have influenced me? How can I more consistently embody these qualities? What gaps exist between my words and my actions? But here's something crucial to understand. Becoming someone others want to follow isn't about creating an image. It's about developing genuine character. It's not about seeming trustworthy. It's about being trustworthy. It's not about appearing to care. It's about actually caring. I worked with a leader who transformed her organization not through new strategies or initiatives, but through the consistent demonstration of character. She was the first to arrive and the last to leave. She never asked others to do what she wouldn't do herself. She shared credit generously and accepted responsibility readily. Her influence grew not because she tried to be influential, but because she focused on being worthy of influence. Why? Because true influence flows from character, not technique. Remember, in a world where trust is increasingly rare, character becomes increasingly valuable. When others see that your words and actions align, that your public and private behavior match, that your values show up in daily decisions, they don't just respect you, they want to follow you. This principle works everywhere, in business, in family life, in any situation where you want to have lasting influence. Want to lead change? Be someone others trust to lead them through uncertainty. Want to inspire excellence? Model it consistently in your own behavior. Want to build trust? Be trustworthy in small moments as well as big ones. Because in the end, influence isn't about what you do, it's about who you are. It's not about techniques, it's about truth. It's not about position, it's about character. When you focus on becoming someone worth following, the techniques of influence become almost secondary. Your character becomes your most powerful tool of persuasion. When you master this art, when you align your words and actions, when you consistently demonstrate care for others' success, when you embody the qualities that inspire trust, you don't just influence behavior. You inspire growth. You don't just lead change. You become the kind of person others want to follow into the future you see. And that, my friends, is the ultimate secret of influence. It's not about making people do what you want. It's about becoming someone they want to follow.